Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
November is upon us. Welcome to NHL Wraparound. Vic and Neil with you, and shortly we're going to be joined by the GM and President of Hockey Operations for the Minnesota Wild, Bill Guerin, who is also the General Manager for Team USA, coming up in the Four Nations Faceoff, which will be taking place in February. But before we get to Bill, 3 things you need to pay attention to. And the first, Neil, is your former team in New York, the Rangers, with a couple of wins over the weekend against the Ottawa Senators and the New York Islanders. And I think Ranger fans are probably very happy at the current record that they have of 8-2-1, 17 points atop the Metro Division. I'm saying don't be fooled by this, because we saw what the Achilles heel was in the playoff series against Florida last year. They couldn't get pucks deep. They couldn't forecheck. They were hemmed in for large chunks of time in that series against the Panthers. And if anybody watched the game against Ottawa on Friday, they were out-attempted 89-35. It was almost like the Senators were Panthers light. And even on Sunday against the depleted Islanders team, both on their back line and with their forwards, they still gave up 37 shots. They still gave up 68 shot attempts. So I know that Peter Laviolette is trying to stress getting pucks deep, playing more in the offensive zone. But despite the messaging of him and Gerard Gallant before him, word isn't getting through, is it?
Well, I don't think they have the player personnel to get pucks deep and to play that kind of game. I think they have the personnel to play the game they're playing and to play the game they played last year, which is a great regular season game. You know, you have 82 one-off games, and basically you can, you play your game, and they're a very good team. They're very skilled, and they depend on Shesterkin. The other thing that I think, through mentioning those stats, what comes to mind for me is that they have a world-class goaltender in Igor Shesterkin, and they play like they've got a world-class goaltender, Igor Shesterkin, that's going to take care of everything at that end of the ice. So they allow all these shot attempts and that. Well, that doesn't work when you get to the playoffs. Can they change? I don't think this personnel can change into a hard-driving, puck-chasing hockey team. I just think they are what they are. And if they hit the playoffs right, and if the right teams get eliminated, they have a chance to go all the way. But if they don't have the right teams eliminated, and they end up playing one of these north-south teams that go hard and play pucks deep and that, I think they'll be in trouble again.
If you're Chris Drury, you're over 4 months away from the trade deadline, and the moves that you made back in 94 are part of hockey lore now, to take a team that was leading the NHL, but refining it to make it a successful playoff team that could go all the way. I have to think that Drury is looking at the makeup of this club, sees what he's seeing, and if you're in his shoes, where are you looking to upgrade prior to the postseason? And I know it's only November, but it's not too early to look when you look at the recent success that New York has had in the regular season.
And it's really tough, Vic, because his guys that are his major cogs, Adam Fox on defense, you've got Panarin, Artemi Panarin up front, Zibanejad. These are not guys that are like, first of all, Adam Fox is a great defenseman, but he's not a big guy. You know, he needs Miller out there beside him, and he needs Ryan Lindgren out there, and he needs Trouba, because those are harder playing defensemen, tougher guys that can handle the physicality of the game, when Fox can handle the power play and getting pucks out of the zone quickly and so on. But his team doesn't have that kind of player base. Kreider is a guy that can go in hard, yes, but they just don't have it. So when you say, where would you look? I can't even answer you, because you can't trade Panarin. You can't trade Zibanejad. You're not going to trade Adam Fox. You're not going to trade any of these high-skilled, East-West type players. And you've just got to try to supplement what you have and perhaps get a harder nosed second and third line. But the first line is what it is.
Yep. Certainly sounds like a middle six situation for the Rangers going forward in order to augment that team for the postseason. But a long way from that. And we will certainly address this as the season goes on. Number 2. Are the Leafs finally stable in goal with Anthony Stolarz? And once they get a healthy Joe Wall back into form, Stolarz thus far, big guy, 9th in the league in goals against average and save percentage. And he's been impressive. And he was actually terrific Sunday night against Minnesota. He gave up a fluke goal, which actually went off John Tavares' stick. That was the only goal that he gave up in regulation, and then got beaten by Boldy on the breakaway in overtime. But from this seat, it looks like there's some stability there. How do you see it?
I think that's true. And I think they've struck gold with Stolarz. He's a huge guy. First of all, he takes up most of the net just standing there. I will mention too that on that breakaway by Boldy, that was a 2-man breakaway. So he had 2 on none. And so that was a tough one for him to play. But nevertheless, and Boldy made a great move on him. But I think the Leafs may have solved this with Anthony Stolarz. He's going to give them good enough goaltending to allow their players up front to do what they do best. And we just talked about Shesterkin in New York, that allows the Ranger skill guys to do what they do best. Stolarz may allow now the Leaf stars to do what they do best and not be so worried, well, if we turn it over, it could end up in the back of the net every time. So I do think that they found a good mix for them in Stolarz.
Number 3, and this one is a little bit more on the obvious side, but until the situations change, we have to bring this up. The Winnipeg Jets keep rolling, 11-1 on the season, 6-0 on the road, only perfect team away from home this year. And the Vegas Golden Knights, 8-0 at home, and they sit atop the Pacific. So as we've mentioned several times, these were clubs that when we looked during the course of the offseason, heading into the new campaign, that they may take a little bit of a step back this year. Hasn't been the case.
No, it hasn't been the case at all. And Vegas is a healthier team, right, than they were last season. They weren't healthy most last season. I remember George McPhee telling me that Vegas was tired last year. They had played the most games in the league at last season after going all the way the season before, and that they were a tired team. So maybe they're healthier and not as tired this year. The Winnipeg Jets, Scott Arniel's doing a great job there in his first year as head coach of the Winnipeg Jets. Surprising to everyone, but not surprising to the Jets themselves. They're playing really well, 11-1, and they're for real. You can't say at this point, well, they've just stumbled their way into an 11-1 record. They're for real, and the Jets are going to have to try to keep this going all season like they did last season. However, they can't lose it when the playoffs come, but that's a long way away. The Jets and the Vegas Knights are having a great start to their season.
They certainly are. And just to touch on Winnipeg for a moment, Nikolai Ehlers with a hat trick over the last couple of games. And boy, Kyle Connor is really emerging as one of the top dynamic forwards in the NHL, both in terms of goal scoring and playmaking ability.
He is. And here's an interesting thing about Kyle Connor that I noticed on TV the other day when he was on the bench. He has a number 9 written on his stick, on the handle of his stick. And then I realized, 81, 8-1 is 9. That's, I guess number 9 is his number, but he can't wear it in Winnipeg because of Bobby Hull and the retired number in Winnipeg. So he wears 81. And I wouldn't have thought of all this if I hadn't noticed on that close-up that number 9 written on the top of the stick. There's a little bit of trivia for you.
There is. And like we always like to give to our listeners, a little something that you're not going to get anywhere else.
My pleasure to bring in the general manager and president of hockey ops for the Minnesota Wild, and also the GM of Team USA for the Four Nations tournament this year, Bill Guerin. Bill, thanks for coming on NHL Wraparound. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This is we haven't connected in a long time, so this is great.
Bill, you were part of my my histrionic time with the Rangers. You were such a great player for the Devils and a thorn in our side all the time. And I know you probably look back and just think about that one game, 1994 with Matteau and the goal and all that stuff. But we had quite a rivalry between those two teams.
You know, it was incredible. And when you think back to that series, I mean, a lot of people consider that one of the best playoff series of all time. And to be a part of that, I mean, my God, it would be fun to have an alumni game. There are so many great players on both teams and spirited. I mean, I guess I would say hate. There was it was nasty, but it was fast. It was just great hockey. And I feel lucky that I was a part of that.
Well, if we had an alumni game, I got to tell you, I had to get together with the players for the 30th anniversary. If you can believe it's been 30 years, we got together. Mess organized it all, and Esa Tikkanen was there, and he looks like he ate half your team.
Well, I'm not one to throw stones. I could probably stand to lose a couple pounds too, but I haven't seen Ticken, oh my God, forever, but God, was he funny. He came to the Devils shortly after that for, I think, 23 games we had him, and he was just such a character. My God, was he funny.
Bill, I want to move over now to your current team, the Minnesota Wild, one of only 2 clubs with just a single regulation loss this season. And the team is just inventing literally new ways to win games. Friday, there were 2 pucks on the ice, and Marco Rossi managed to score a goal with one of them. Of course, it didn't count. And then last night, in literally an eye blink, a potential breakaway for the Maple Leafs ended up as a pass from Jared Spurgeon ahead to which ended up on Matt Boldy's stick, and a game-winning overtime goal for you guys. So just a remarkable start and a little bit of magic in the air of Minnesota.
Yeah, it's been a heck of a start. I think a lot of credit goes all the credit goes to the players that are. They have bought into the message that John Hines has presented them with. They had a really demanding, physically and mentally training camp. And it's just, they've been fighting. They've been battling every night. The league is unforgiving, right? Everybody's good. I mean, even the so-called, worst teams or whatever are good hockey teams, and they can beat anybody. So, you have to be at your best every night. And I think our guys are really focused in. And I think you made a good point that we're finding different ways to win each and every night. And I think, what the players have done is their resiliency has gotten so much better. And, they don't let little things get to them. If we're down a goal or 2 or whatever, like we were in Pittsburgh, they just they stick with the game planning, come back, and it's really nice to see.
One of the most remarkable stats in the early part of the season is the Wild have trailed for only 58 minutes through 11 games. That's only about 9% of the total playing time. So when you're playing from behind so little and playing ahead so often, you're really dictating the terms of how you want the game to go.
Yeah, and that's actually a crazy stat, but they're well prepared. They're ready to play. I think they just want to come out of the gates quickly and gain a lead. I know we were trailing Tampa Bay for a while. We were trailing Pittsburgh for a while, and then it's just kind of crazy how that's worked out. But even when we were trailing, you could see the confidence in the players, and they've just done a super job with that. And I think one of the keys too is that we've cut down our penalties incredibly. I think we're one of the least penalized teams in the league right now, and last year we were one of the most with stick infractions and things like that. We've cut out a lot of that stuff, and so not being shorthanded as much as we used to be definitely helps us.
Bill, you just brought up a good point, and I want to ask you, because I didn't see this coming. I watched your team last year and you missed the playoffs, and then I saw what you couldn't do this summer because of the the handcuffs you have on you from the buyouts of that was before you even got to the club, the signings. You just mentioned you're taking less penalties, but what is the biggest difference you're seeing between, because you basically have the same team as last year. It's not that much. It's not like you brought in a Bill Guerin. You have the same team. So what is it that you're seeing that's so different? Because this is a team, in my opinion, that has gone from, with the same lineup, has gone from a non-playoff team to a team fighting for first place and with the same team.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is health. We're healthy right now. And you can't take that for granted because that can be gone quickly. And last year we didn't have that right off the bat. We were without Jared Spurgeon for 70 games. We were out without Brodin for a while. We were without, some significant players, Marcus Foligno, guys like that. So we're healthy. I think we have gotten back to our identity, which is to be very hard to play against. And then honestly, our special teams have been good. Our PK can still get better, but there a lot of new information's been given to the guys. So I think it's on its way up. Our power play's been good. And I think the guys are just really embracing this style of hockey and playing winning hockey. When you do the right things with the puck at the right time, you manage the game, you manage the puck, and you don't have to sacrifice offense to do that.
Obviously, John Hines has come in and is doing a great job, but I got to go back to Dean Evason, and you had Dean Evason there, and I read at that time about when you had to let him go and how you guys sat down together. And it brought me back to Roger Nielsen in my days, and you remember him coaching the Rangers. And I got to tell you, Billy, to make you feel better, so that you can tell your story, that day I went up to our practice rink and I said to myself, I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be strong. And I walked in and just started bawling my eyes out right in front of Roger Nielsen. And he knew right then that this was, that this was coming, but I couldn't hold my emotions back because I felt like I was partners with Roger. And I'm sure that's the way you felt. And now all of a sudden you got to tell your partner that you got to let him go.
Yeah. You know all too well that's just not a fun part of the job. That is probably the worst. That's worse than telling, a player he's getting traded or anything like that. That is the worst. And yeah, when you're, the coach and general manager create a bond together and you guys are dealing with things, you're in the foxhole together. And, Dean and I had gotten very close over, 4 years that I was with him, or over 4 years. And yeah, it was hard. Like, he's a good guy. He's a good person. He's a good friend of mine. He's a good coach. you just have to do your job, but it doesn't make it easy. That was the worst ride to the office I've ever had. Like, it was just terrible. But, when you look back at it, Dean and I did some good work together, and we've created this friendship that's going to last a lifetime. And that's the bright side of it.
Bill, Neil had touched briefly about your lineup this year, not really having changed. You've got a real good mix of veterans and youth, and you've done this with really this albatross around your neck with the 2 buyouts of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter, which accounts for about $14.3 million of dead space, which is 16.8% of the cap. Next year, that drops to $1.6 million if the cap goes up to 92.5 as expected, and it's only 1.8% of the cap. So even though the playing field gets balanced in relation to the rest of the teams, it's almost like you're going to be playing with found money going forward.
Yeah, we should have more cap space. This is a tough one because we're focused on this year. The last thing I would ever want to do is say to our players and to our fans and to our coaches, let's just wait for next year. So we're really focused in on this year. Hey, listen, a year from now, we'll have more cap space. Or less than a year, we'll be able to get more involved, maybe in free agency, or be a little more active, have some more flexibility. But I think one thing that this experience has taught us in hockey operations is a certain way to deal with our operation. And we have to make critical decisions all the time, and we have to do it with these empty cap hits. And it's really forced us to kind of dive into things, to make sure we're doing our due diligence on people that we're signing or trading for. And I think if we operate the same way when we get this flexibility, it's just going to make us better. So it's been tough. But it hasn't been like impossible. We've had good teams. We just want to take another step at some point in time.
Billy, I got to ask you about Kirill Kaprizov, because he's such a great league player. I mean, an elite player. He's. I mean, can you tell us about him? And you see him all the time. We only get to see him once in a while, and he must be just such a pleasure to watch.
Yeah, he really is, and it seems like this year he's really even taken another step in becoming an elite player. I mean, he's been an elite player, but it seems like this year he's going to a different level. I think he's coming off 7 straight games with at least 2 points. He was leading the league in scoring. His leadership has really elevated this year. He's a great kid. And, I just love him because he's got this infectious personality that everybody wants to be around. So, and he's positive, and he just wants to win. That's it. He's got, I'm not sure. I can't remember if he won the World Juniors or not, but I know he won the World Championships. He's got a gold medal. He just wants a Stanley Cup, and the drive of that play. He does remind me a lot of Sidney Crosby in the way he approaches the game. He's very serious about it, and he works hard in practice. He's demanding of his teammates. He competes like crazy during games, and he just wants to win. And he comes in like the best shape. Like I can't say enough good things about him. He's fantastic.
He's making $9 million this year and next, and then he goes to market. And with the cap going up, I know that there is going to be a huge desire to sign him. And if he gets 115, 120 points, he's going to command some pretty big money. What challenges do you see in potentially getting him re-signed long-term?
Honestly, I don't know, just getting the contract done. I think Kirill really likes it in Minnesota. It's a great place. I think he sees the the direction of our team. And like I said, the money's the money. Like that will be there. So I'm not worried about that. I believe he believes in us, and that's the biggest thing. And that will come. I'm not really worried about it right now. We'll tackle that when we have to, but it's obvious too that he's focused on this year because he's been playing so great. And that's all I want for him is just focus on this year and let's get it done. We can get it done and avoid the circus.
I got to ask you, in getting away from your team and talking about your other job you've got coming up as Team USA GM, it looks like you've got the Boston Mafia going into to run Team USA. You got Mike Sullivan, John Tortorella, John Hines, and David Quinn all with you. And it's tell us a little bit about the Four Nations tournament and your Team USA.
Yeah, well, I like to tease those guys because they're all BU guys. So I like to just say that they're just more BU guys working for a BC guy. But they're wonderful guys. They're great coaches. They all bring different personalities and skill sets. And my time with Sully in Pittsburgh was fantastic. He just does such a great job. He's a leader. And then I've got, on the hockey operations side, Chris Drury, Bill Zito, Tom Fitzgerald, and Chris Kelleher are working with me. And I just couldn't have better people around me. They're great. And we are having so much fun at trying to put this team together. And it's incredible. Neil, we dissect players. We try to pick out the best and the worst things about each guy, but man, we find ourselves kind of laughing because we're like, well, this guy doesn't do this all that great. This guy doesn't do this all that great. But we're talking about the best players in the game, and we're nitpicking them because we finally get to get them. And we would love to have any one of these guys on our NHL teams. And when you see the names that we're dealing with, and the skill and the talent and how accomplished some of these American-born players are, we're just the talent pool for U.S.-born players is incredible now. And I think, USA Hockey deserves a lot of credit in that and in building that. And then, it's just great. This has been so much fun. We're really looking forward to it.
Did you ever, and I know you're so humble, I'm sure you haven't thought of this, but your generation of American-born players was sort of the second wave of guys that have now encouraged and incentivized the young American players to come on in waves now, the Auston Matthews of the world and so on and so forth. There's so many American players now, and it's because of you guys and the group before you that started it. I'm talking about, the 1980 Miracle team has started it maybe, and then it went on. But then you guys, whatever made you decide you wanted to be a hockey player, your success has made other American players want to be hockey players.
Yeah, it is a good feeling because our generation was special. It was, we had so many great players, and Chelios Spadano, and JR is going into the Hall of Fame this year, and then Keith Tkachuk, Dougie Waite. Just so many guys, the Hatcher brothers, and Gary Suter, there were so many, Mike Richter, Brian Leach. Brian Leach is as good a player as there's ever been in this game. And I think Mess always says, he's the greatest New York Ranger to ever play. And Brian Leach is just world class. He was so good. And, I feel really fortunate to be in that group. And I think, when we won that World Cup in '96, I think it did a lot for U.S. hockey in the U.S. and inspiring younger players. And I think it's really important now that we stay involved and we've got a great group of U.S.-born general managers. And I think just this staying involved with USA Hockey is really important.
The Best On tournament, you played, like you said, in 96 and won the championship there for Team USA. But this year's group of 6 that you've already selected, Jack Eichel, Adam Fox, Quinn Hughes, Auston Matthews, Charlie McAvoy, and Matt Tkachuk. Tkachuk and Eichel having 1 Stanley Cup. So we know the rosters are going to be finalized on December 2nd, and we're not going to ask you to tip your hand either way because you're probably not going to. But is there a certain way that you're looking to round out this lineup as you look at Canada and Finland and Sweden and the teams that they're going to be icing?
We're focused on ourselves. Like we're not going to try to build a team to compete, with another country. We have to build we have to figure out how we want to play and what's our identity going to be, and then fill the roster out with those types of players. The important thing for me is to make sure that there's a role for everybody and that everybody's accepting of that and willing to buy in and willing to sacrifice themselves and their ice time or their role or whatever for the better of the team.
Before we wrap, I just wanted to kind of circle back on so much of the good fortune that you've had. You've got a Hall of Fame goaltender in Marc-Andre Fleury in that, and in Philip Gustafson. Now, you've also had a gentleman that has scored a goal this year. So it just seems that as part of this magical beginning through the first 11 games, if a team is based on its success on how it reinvents itself, the Minnesota Wilds have certainly done that in the first month of the season.
Yeah. We've asked a lot of our goalies, not just to stop the puck, but score a few goals here and there too to chip in. Depth scoring is very important. So, maybe Flower can chip in one of these days.
and why not? Bill, congrats on a great start. Keep it going. And please join us again soon on NHL Wraparound.
I'd love to come on again. Thanks, Vic. Thanks, Neil. It's great to catch up with you guys.
Good luck, Billy.
And a quick reminder, our website is NHLWraparound.com for all of our episodes. And don't forget that on Wednesdays and Fridays, Neil and I do our short shifts, which are a good bridge of league happenings in between the regular NHL Wraparound podcast shows. So, Neil, some league notes on Friday and Saturday. The Florida Panthers took care of the Dallas Stars in both games over in Tampere, Finland. And Alex Barkov, who is actually from that town, a goal and 4 assists in the 2 games. But I thought what was really neat was, first of all, the retired presenters on the ice, Jere Lehtinen and Teppo Numminen on Friday, Yuri Curry on Saturday, and 7 Finns between the 2 clubs started the game on Friday. Barkov, Lindell, Lusterainen, and Mikko Mikkola for the Panthers, and Rupe Hintz, Miro Heiskanen, and Esa Lindell for the Stars. And so not only did they start game 1, but they all posed at center ice at the end of the second game, and 6 out of the 7 of those players actually got points over those 2 games. Only Rupe Hintz did not. But this goes to something bigger of just the great way that the NHL really embraces its roots and goes back to these European nations where so many of the players that we enjoy in North America today actually grew up.
And the great thing about hockey is that it's the most, in my opinion, the most international sport, maybe second to soccer or football as it's called in Europe. but it's the most international North American sport, meaning that there's players from all over the world that play in the NHL and that play hockey. And it is great that they can go and exhibit the National Hockey League in Finland. And especially when you have so many great Finnish players in the league at this time, and you name them the ones for both the Panthers and the Dallas Stars, who could, by the way, end up meeting in the final this year. They're two of the top teams in the league. And it really is good for the NHL, and for the NHL to get a more of a worldwide notoriety. It can only be positive. So it'll be interesting to see how the teams fare when they're back here. Is there any jet lag, or how will they do once they're back in Florida and back in Texas?
Well, we're going to go domestic now. And one thing that I'm discovering, that if we make a mention of a club on either wraparound or short shifts, you can guarantee that their fortunes are going to reverse for the better or for the worse. And interestingly, on short shifts on Friday, we really took the Bruins to task for what appeared to be some very lackluster efforts last week against the Flyers, and then they were blown out in Carolina. So they respond with a couple of shutouts in Philadelphia and yesterday against Seattle. But the bigger news coming out of Sunday's game against the Kraken was David Pastrnak being sat during the third period of that game by head coach Jim Montgomery. So is this a big deal, or just something that happens during the course of a long regular season?
Yeah, I think it goes into the whole way Boston has started. I mean, Montgomery had words with Marchand. We knew that in one of the games, and then Boston hasn't been performing. You've got the Swayman holdout, and then having to come right in and start playing goal immediately as the season started, and his game hadn't been up to par. So there's a lot of things going on in Boston, but I'm sure Jim Montgomery is saying, look, I've got to set the tone for this team. If we're gonna get back around and come back around and be the team we can be, I've got to set the tone, and no better place to set it than with their star players. And I'm sure by now, Jim has already had a conversation with David Pastrnak and said, "Look, here's what my expectations are. Here's what you didn't do. Come on, you've got to do better." They ended up winning that game, thankfully, so that everything is bygones be bygones. But Jim Montgomery's a good coach, and I think he's trying to get the most that he can out of a roster that started the season shaky for, a lot of reasons, and not to mention that they've got a number of new people in the lineup, and a number of people are gone from last year's lineup.
And quickly on Pastrnak, to his credit, his teammates said that as opposed to maybe sulking or pouting on the bench, he was yapping it up, cheering his team on, and accepted his role on the bench for the third period like a leader. And, he's a guy that wears an A on his jersey. And so in its way, that's a really good example that he's setting that, okay, I'm not playing, I'm being disciplined here, but I'm still behind my team 100%.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what you have to have the team be successful. So it looks good on him. I think it looks good on Jim Montgomery. And you can see perhaps the Boston Bruins are turning a corner here early in the season.
Here's a neat one. Nikita Prischapov was called up by Colorado on Saturday. And he's not a household name. He probably will never be a household name. He was a 7th round pick in this past year's draft, and he is only the 3rd player out of the 2024 draftee pool to play in the NHL this season. Macklin Celebrini played opening night for San Jose before getting injured, and Jet Luchekov played 4 games for the Philadelphia Flyers. But Neil, this is an interesting piece of why this particular player so deep in the draft pool was actually called up.
Well, and he's an older player and drafted in the 7th round. For those that might not know right off the top, is the last round of the draft. It is a 7-round draft. And so he was picked in the last round, the last pick by Colorado. But because of his age, they could put him with their American League team and didn't have to send him back anywhere. So he was playing in the American League and had impressed them enough that they called him up. And again, not as an 18-year-old. This is an older player. So, it's interesting that you don't see that happen very often. You may not see that happen again.
And deemed necessary simply because of all of the injuries that the Colorado Avalanche have had up front. The good news for them is Arturi Lehkonen has now been activated. So Prischepov's stay in the NHL will probably be limited, albeit it is somewhat noteworthy, as we just mentioned. A couple of returns home for a former player and a former coach. Jacob Markstrom returned to Calgary on Friday night as a member of the New Jersey Devils and lost 3-0, shut out by Dan Vladar, who had 22 saves and was actually Markstrom's understudy for the past 3 seasons in Calgary. And Craig Berube on Saturday returned to St. Louis, where he was the head coach of the Stanley Cup winning Blues in 2019. And that is the second win for St. Louis against Toronto. So something that the former coach of the Blues and now the current coach of the Maple Leafs not too happy about.
No, I wouldn't think so. And I'm really surprised that Toronto didn't get a victory for Craig Berube. He got a standing ovation at the building in St. Louis. He was really loved in St. Louis as the head coach of the Blues. When Doug Armstrong made that coaching change, the fan base wasn't too happy, but it's too bad for Craig. He didn't get a win in Toronto against his old Blues team, and he didn't get one either in St. Louis. But I'm sure he's more worried about the loss than he is where the loss took place and who it took place against. I'm sure he's just like, I got to get this team being a lot more consistent than they've been so far this season.
Sure thing. Staying in St. Louis, we're going to transition to some injury news right now. And Philip Broberg, we're still waiting word from the Blues on the extent of a leg injury. It was his right leg. He got tangled up with Mitch Marner in that game on Saturday evening. And there are varying speculations on how severe this injury is. There is a renowned doctor out there that said, well, it could be a torn ACL, MCL, meniscus, or all three, or it could be a grade 1 or 2 sprain. Now, I'm no doctor. I don't even try to play one on this podcast, but if I'm thinking straight here, isn't that like the entire range of what this injury could be?
Yeah, it could be an upper body. It could be a lower body. It could be in between. We're not quite sure, but Broberg has been very good for the Blues so far this season, and that will be a big loss if they lose him for any extended period of time, because he's been a great signing by Doug Armstrong as with the offer sheet and has really played well for them. So we'll see what happens.
Second on the Blues in scoring, and this is piling on to Robert Thomas with his broken ankle, and a return of mid-December is what's expected on Thomas. So you take a look at the Blues. They're playing 500 hockey right now, and as we all know, in NHL 500, that's 82 points. And that's not going to be enough to get in the playoffs, regardless of how top or bottom heavy your conference is. You're going to need to get upper 80s to low 90s to get in. So for Doug Armstrong's club, this is a case where they're going to really have to tread water for a while until they start getting players back. And as we said, we won't know about Broberg until probably late Monday, early Tuesday, and we'll update that on Short Shifts on Wednesday.
Yes, and we'll find out what what's going on there. But they, as I said, they're not really deep. And when you lose a guy like Thomas, especially, who's one of their best players on their team, first line center, and then Philip Broberg goes out of the lineup, they're going to be in tough to stay competitive and to win some games while these guys are out.
Sam Ersson in Philadelphia, and their goaltending situation has been well documented, that they are thin at that position ever since having to part ways with Carter Hart due to the sexual misconduct charges that he is facing. But Ersson left Saturday's game with Boston, looked like a skate issue initially, and then turned out that it was a little something more. Reports are that this injury may only be a week with Ersson on the sideline. So that brings up Alexei Kolosov moving into the number 1 slot and Ivan Fedotov moving in behind him. So this is a critical week for Philadelphia as they continue to try to get themselves back toward the 500 mark.
Yeah. And as you said, Vic, well documented the goaltending issues that Philadelphia has had, and now it gets worse with Ersson getting injured. Kolosov, as you said, coming up, and Fedotov is not ready to be a number 1 goaltender. He's not even. I don't think he's close. So, and Kolosov's not ready to be a number 1, and for that matter, Ersson's not ready to be a number 1. So they gotta. It's baptism by fire in Philadelphia for the goaltending.
Here's the big one. The New York Islanders, Matt Barzal now on long-term IR, lower body injury. He's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks. Adam Pelech took a shot to the face the other night in Buffalo. He is out 4 to 6 weeks. Mike Riley, another defenseman, went down with an upper body injury. Alex Romanov, upper body injury, could not play. These are all of their left-handed shots, and this team is really being tested for their depth. And this is not to mention the injury that earlier happened to Anthony Duclair.
Right, and they did win in Buffalo the other night, and then they lost. That was on Friday night, I believe, and then they lost to the Rangers. Sunday afternoon at Madison Square Garden. But I thought that they played well in both those games. Obviously, in the win, they played well, not having Barzal. And then, of course, you got more injuries in the Buffalo game. But for all the pieces that were out of their lineup, I thought they were very competitive against the Rangers at the Garden, and ended up losing the game, but still extremely competitive and not looking like they're decimated. Look more disciplined, I thought, in that game in New York than they had looked in other games. And maybe that's because of the amount of folks out of their lineup that they said, okay, we've got to stick right to the game plan. But that's a lot of people out, especially defensemen. And it's so important to have the defensemen. You can get by without a forward or two, but it's really tough to get by without your top 3, 4, 5 defensemen.
This kind of transitions into our next topic, because the reality is that the Islanders are still only 4-6-2. And there's talk that Lou Lamoriello is looking for help on defense. He has to be at this point. But once you get to November, Neil, it appears to me that historically November has kind of been the busiest trade month outside of March, where obviously the trade deadline takes place. And in a situation like this, Lamoriello would be trading from a position of weakness as opposed to a position of strength. And when your club is 2 games below 500, granted, we've only played a dozen games in the season, but they're playing catch up. So how does he have to navigate through this, where he's got a club that's going to be a bubble team at best, try to augment that team without paying out the farm to maybe get into a wild card position?
Well, Vic, last year, the Islanders had defense injuries too. And remember that Lou Lamoriello was able to go out and get Mike Riley on waivers from the Florida Panthers and traded for Robert Bortuzzo from the St. Louis Blues for a nominal amount. And those two guys filled in pretty good for the injuries that they had. And it wouldn't surprise me that Lou will do the same kind of thing. I don't think you're going to see a big trade here. I don't think you're going to see him trade, players off of the current team to get other defensemen. I think you're going to see him try to pick up some pieces like he did last year and just make his way through this injury, this part of the season with these injuries.
But this is really a slippery slope here because you're on the verge of falling out of this thing pretty early. I mean, we've already seen Ottawa has improved. We have seen the work of the Columbus Blue Jackets have been better. The Washington Capitals have gotten off to a great start this year. So the challenge that Lamoriello has, as I just mentioned, is how do you fill in here without totally letting the team go to pot?
Oh, absolutely. And you've got to be careful, as you said, because the competition is so stiff this year. I mean, you take a look at the teams that missed the playoffs last year. The Devils were one of them, and they're not missing the playoffs this year. So there goes one of those spots is gone. As you said, Columbus is beating teams now. I don't think they're a playoff team, but they're beating teams on a regular basis. And a lot of teams have improved, and including non-playoff teams. Buffalo Sabres are a little bit better. I don't see them making it either. Philadelphia is a little bit better. I don't see them making it either. But the Islanders are in tough to make the playoffs this season with these injuries and with the way the season's going for them in this early part.
This is the human side of the story, and earlier in the show, we had the pleasure of speaking with the Minnesota Wild general manager and president of Hockey Operations, Bill Guerin, and he will also be the general manager for Team USA in the upcoming Four Nations Faceoff. And Neil, Guerin, quite a career with many teams in the NHL, but always seemed to make his mark every place he went. A truly dynamic forward, great speed, great shot. And you're going to give us a little bit more on Bill's history.
Yeah, it's interesting, Vic, because Bill Guerin, the general manager now of the Minnesota Wild, he's a Boston kid. He was drafted in 1989 by the New Jersey Devils, 5th overall. And guess where that draft was? Minneapolis, Minnesota. So he was drafted into the NHL in the city that he now is the general manager. One could argue St. Paul is the city that they play in, but still, it's right there in the Twin Cities. Drafted 5th overall by New Jersey, played for the Devils 2 years later in 1991 and stayed there until 1998. They won the Cup, if you remember, in the lockout-shortened 1995 season, right after the Rangers had won it in 94. In 97, 98, he was traded to the Edmonton Oilers for Jason Arnott, which was a big, big deal at the time. Remember, Jason Arnott was a very high pick of the Edmonton Oilers, and he went to New Jersey, Billy Guerin going to Edmonton. And then in 2001, he went to his hometown of Boston, and he played in Boston, got 41 goals for the Boston Bruins in 01-02. In 02, he signed with the Dallas Stars on a 5-year deal to sign in Dallas. Things didn't go so well for Billy in Dallas, and he ended up being bought out in 2006, at which time he went and signed in St. Louis. In February of 2007, he accomplished something very few players accomplish. He played in his 1,000th game. And so right after that, he was traded to the San Jose Sharks. And in the summer of 2007, he signed with the New York Islanders and was immediately anointed the captain of the Islanders. 2 years later, in March of 2009, he was traded at the deadline to Pittsburgh Penguins. And guess what? Pittsburgh Penguins won the Stanley Cup. So Sidney Crosby was on that team. Sidney's still playing for the Pittsburgh Penguins, while Billy Guerin is now the general manager of the Minnesota Wild. Here's something fascinating. Bill Guerin is the only player to ever have scored 20 goals with 7 different NHL teams. Quite an accomplishment. Billy retired in December of 2010. He had a little bit of a tryout with the Philadelphia Flyers. It didn't go so well, so he retired. And he's doing a great job now as an executive in the league. And boy, what a career. What a player he was. He was a hard-nosed guy. I remember him on the Devils. I had to see him all the time. And he was a hard-nosed guy, a really good hockey player, and I think was an inspiration to a lot of young American boys to become hockey players that watched him play during the 90s.
Just an interesting footnote with the trade to Dallas in exchange for Jason Arnott. Arnott wound up scoring the overtime winning goal against Dallas in the 2000 Stanley Cup Finals in Game 6 against Ed Belfour. And that will close this edition of the NHL Wraparound podcast. Once again, our thanks to the Minnesota Wild general manager and president of Hockey Operations, Bill Guerin, for joining Neil and myself today. Thank you to our listeners. If there is something that you would like to hear us talk about, let us know at nhlwraparound@gmail.com. And a reminder that our website is nhlwraparound.com. Neil and I will join you on Wednesday for the latest updates from around the NHL on short shifts. We will see you then.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.